Chapter 1. Francis had never let Nova stay the night before. Yet tonight he broke that rule. The 999th time with Francis was more intense than any time before. After the indulgence, Nova's whole body ached. When she got out of bed, it felt as if her bones were about to fall apart. Francis pushed a real estate contract toward her. "Sign it. Consider it compensation for you. After this, we're done." Nova didn't even look at it. She obediently signed her name. A faint crease appeared between his brows. "You're not going to ask why? You always have your reasons for doing things." Ever since the day she met Francis, Nova had never asked for explanations. When he asked her to accompany business partners for drinks, she would do her best to help him secure major deals. When he called her drunk in the middle of the night during a business trip, she could drive 6 hours overnight just to appear in front of him before dawn. When he said he wanted her to stay by his side, she ignored the criticism and ridicule of others and stayed with him without a title, without a name, for a full 6 years. Everyone said she was Francis's simp. Even if Francis slept with another woman right in front of her, she could still smile and make the bed for them. They all waited to see the day Nova would flee in humiliation when she learned that Francis was getting married. What they didn't know was that she had learned about his marriage earlier than any of them. Nova forced herself to close the bathroom door. In the place where he couldn't see her, tears instantly poured down like rain. She would never forget the first time she met Francis. It was on her 18th birthday. Her father was buried in debt, owing a massive sum of money. When the debt collectors came knocking, with no way out, they suggested using her to repay the debt. Her parents silently agreed. She was dragged into a corner. She fought desperately, collapsing onto the ground covered in injuries, while obscene laughter sounded behind her. Several men surrounded her. Just when she thought her life was over, Francis appeared. From that day on, Nova regarded Francis as her savior. She always followed behind him, wanting to do something, anything, to repay him. Later, an accident happened. Francis was completely drunk and mistook her for someone else, taking her wildly for an entire night. At dawn, she saw Francis leaning against the window, smoking. As she stood there anxiously, she heard him say, "Didn't you want to repay the favor? Then from now on, come whenever I call." For the next several years, they were inseparable. He would openly bring her to various public events, and he even dressed formally to attend her graduation ceremony, standing there to support her. Except for the title of girlfriend, he gave her everything. She never cared about the gossip. She repeatedly told herself it was only about repaying a debt of gratitude. Yet without realizing it, she still developed feelings she should never have had. Until half a month ago, when Francis's mother came to see her. "Miss Lopez, didn't Francis tell you? He's getting married in a month." Along with those words came a bright red wedding invitation. The woman is from a family that matches his status, and she's someone he's liked for many years. Because of certain reasons, they only decided to marry now. "Miss Lopez, you're still young. Why waste the best years of your life on him?" Nova wandered in a daze until she found Francis, only to see him speaking gently on the phone. "In a few days I'll take you to choose the wedding rings. We'll do everything your way." At that moment, it felt as if someone had struck her over the head with a club. She suddenly woke from the dream. It seemed the debt of gratitude she owed him had finally come to its end. Chapter 2. That very night, Nova saw the news on WeChat Moments. Francis was about to marry Valeria Cruz, the daughter of the Cruz family. When she came out of the bathroom, Francis had already left, along with the contract. He had also left behind a bank card. Nova returned to her rented apartment just as the landlord was urging her to pay next month's rent. "Auntie, I'll only be staying until the end of this month. Could you please handle the checkout procedures for me?" She had lived here for 6 years. At the beginning, Francis thought the place was too small and wanted to move her somewhere bigger, but she refused. Later, he grew used to staying here too. Eventually, traces of him could be found everywhere in the apartment. Nova slowly began packing up Francis's belongings. The 3 suits in the wardrobe were bought for him after she earned her first salary. They fit him perfectly. He had once leaned close and bitten her ear, his tone teasing. "When did you secretly measure my size? While we were in bed?" His improper tone had made her blush deeply with embarrassment. The couple's slippers in the shoe cabinet were prizes from a ring toss game at a night market she dragged him to. The pink fluffy slippers looked absurdly childish on his feet, but he only said that as long as she liked them, it was fine. Then there was the custom wooden flooring throughout the apartment. Once, Nova had accidentally fallen at home and fractured a bone. After that, Frances had people replace all the floors and even laid soft carpets along the corners of the walls so she wouldn't get hurt again. The refrigerator in the kitchen was filled with the fruits, vegetables, fish, and meat Frances liked to eat. He loved her cooking the most. Whenever she was busy in the kitchen, he would stand beside her helping out. The image of the proud young master washing vegetables at the sink was something she knew she would remember for the rest of her life. During those long 6 years, Frances had already seeped into her bones, penetrating every corner of her life. When Nova finished packing his things and threw them into the trash, the emotions she had suppressed for so long finally collapsed. She curled up into a ball and broke down, crying uncontrollably. Early the next morning, after submitting her application to study abroad, Nova received a call from Frances. When she arrived at the bridal shop, she saw Frances sitting on the sofa at a glance. His long legs were crossed as he lowered his head to reply to emails. When he wasn't speaking, he carried a distant, cold aura. The next moment, accompanied by a sweet call of Frances, the dressing room door opened. "I don't like any of the styles here. Has Miss Lopez not arrived yet?" As the words fell, Valeria saw Nova standing at the doorway. Valeria warmly hooked her arm around Nova's. "Miss Lopez, I was the one who asked Frances to call you here. I've seen the clothes you designed, so this time I'd like you to design my wedding dress." Nova's face instantly turned pale. The shop assistants looked at her with sympathy, because half a year ago Frances had also brought her here to try on wedding dresses. At the time, the assistants had all assumed she was Frances's fiancé, congratulating her again and again, and now she only wished she could escape this place in humiliation. Frances, how could he treat her like this? At last he lifted his eyes and looked at her. "Valeria admires your work very much. Just follow her requirements. The price doesn't matter." Nova almost laughed. The first time he talked to her about money was because of another woman. She was led into the fitting room by Valeria to take measurements. The diamond ring on Valeria's finger glittered dazzlingly. Noticing Nova's gaze on her hand, Valeria raised it with a smile. "Isn't it beautiful? This diamond ring was specially customized for me when he flew to Paris. It carries a vow meant to happen only once in a lifetime." "Miss Lopez, I haven't even thanked you yet. Back then, when Frances brought you here to try on wedding dresses for me, you took photos of every single one and asked me which I liked. You must have worked so hard." Nova's fingertips trembled slightly, so it turned out that Frances had already been engaged to Valeria long ago. Chapter 3. After coming out of the fitting room, Valeria held onto Frances's arm and turned to invite Nova Lopez. "Miss Lopez, thank you for your hard work. Come have dinner with us. I also have some questions I'd like to ask you." Nova instinctively wanted to refuse, but Frances didn't give her the chance. With a hint of impatience, he told her to get in the car. After entering the restaurant, Frances habitually picked up the menu and began ordering. Valeria smiled beside him and poured tea for Nova. "Miss Lopez, you probably don't know this, do you? The first time Frances and I met was in this very restaurant. I only casually mentioned that the food here tasted good, and unexpectedly he went ahead and bought the entire place." Nova forced out a faint smile. Back then, this was where she had found him drunk out of his mind. That night his gaze had been unfocused as he suddenly turned over and pressed her beneath him, the suppressed pain within him seeming to have nowhere to escape. So was he thinking about Valeria here that night? In truth, Nova had long guessed that he had mistaken her for someone else that night, but she didn't care. She had believed that even the coldest, hardest heart would eventually warm up over time. Only now did she understand that from the very beginning she had merely been a substitute. Now that Valeria, the genuine one, had returned, it was only natural for a replacement like her to step aside. "Frances, why did you only order the dishes I like? Miss Lopez is our guest. Let her choose some dishes she likes too." Frances's brows creased slightly. He closed the menu and handed it directly to the waiter. Speaking calmly, "She's not picky." Seeing how unconcerned he looked, Nova's breathing faltered slightly. Yes, when she was beside him, she had never had the right to be picky. She had always thought Francis was an extremely cold person, so after every moment of intimacy, she could always endure his indifference without complaint. But now, seeing with her own eyes that he could also show tenderness, Nova only felt that she looked even more ridiculous. Halfway through the meal, Nova's face turned pale as she excused herself to go to the restroom. Unexpectedly, Valeria followed her inside. "Miss Lopez, Francis is just that kind of person. He's cold toward everyone. So please don't mind it. Actually, I know he still holds some resentment toward me. Back then he pursued me for many years, but I had someone else in my heart at the time. He said he could keep waiting for me. I thought he was just joking with me. I never expected he would actually wait for me all these years." Nova dug her fingers deeply into her palm and took a deep breath. "Miss Cruz, what exactly are you trying to say?" A gentle smile appeared on Valeria's lips. "I'm just trying to tell you that no matter what Francis might have had with you in the past, it was only because he was deliberately trying to provoke me. Miss Lopez is a smart person. Surely you didn't take it seriously, right?" Nova felt as if a heavy stone were pressing against her chest, making it hard to breathe. "Miss Cruz, are you worried that I might cling to him?" "Don't worry, I know my place." Valeria seemed satisfied with that answer. After finishing her makeup, she turned and left without another glance. When Nova returned to the restaurant, an unexpected incident suddenly occurred. A dispute broke out at the table next to them. As the argument grew more intense, it quickly escalated into a physical fight. The restaurant instantly descended into chaos. One of the hot-tempered men suddenly lifted a large pot of boiling soup and hurled it toward the person across from him. The man immediately dodged. The pot of soup was sent flying straight toward Nova's table. In a moment of panic, Francis hurriedly pulled Valeria behind him, shielding her firmly. Nova had no time to dodge. The scalding soup splashed violently onto her body. Chapter 4. Hiss. In an instant, Nova was drenched in soup. Her fair face and arms turned red immediately, small blisters forming on the skin. It burned fiercely, as if her flesh were being scorched by fire. The pain was so intense that she clenched her teeth, unable to speak. Yet Francis merely glanced at her indifferently, still worried that the man at the next table might continue causing trouble. He carefully pulled Valeria into his arms and escorted her to a safe place. From beginning to end, he showed Nova not a trace more concern. Nova's eyes turned red, yet she couldn't even cry. The pain spread through her entire body. She raised her eyes toward Francis and saw Valeria gently push him. "I'm fine. Go check on Miss Lopez. Miss Lopez is seriously hurt." But Francis only noticed that when he had pulled Valeria just now, her knee had accidentally scraped against something, the skin slightly broken with a faint trace of blood. "You've been pampered since childhood. You can't even handle a little pain. Why try to be brave? I'll take you to the hospital right now." As Francis picked up Valeria and prepared to leave, he seemed to finally remember Nova. "Can you go to the hospital by yourself?" Nova nodded while enduring the pain. Did she even have the right to say no? In the 6 years she had been with him, she had always been well-behaved and obedient, never troubling him. Only after Francis and Valeria disappeared from her sight did several waiters rush over anxiously, apologizing repeatedly while helping her deal with the burns. With their assistance, Nova tremblingly got into a car heading for the hospital. As soon as she arrived at the hospital entrance, she heard several nurses discussing what had just happened. "This Francis is really over the top. His fiancée only scraped her skin a little, and he actually mobilized several department heads for a consultation, saying he was afraid she might develop complications. I heard he chased after her for many years before she finally agreed to be with him recently. Of course he's going to treasure her. Wasn't there a girl who had been by his side for years? He just abandoned her like that?" They weren't from the same social class anyway. Francis was probably just having fun. Why would he take it seriously? Nova bit her lip, gradually tasting a faint metallic sweetness of blood in her mouth. While treating the burn wounds, the doctor reminded her to apply the medicine on time, especially on your face. If it leaves scars, it won't look good. Nova was in so much pain that she didn't even have the strength to speak. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. Nearly a third of her right cheek was swollen and red, a shocking sight. She remembered that when passion overtook them before, Francis loved to hold her face and kiss her cheeks. Now, no matter what happened to this face, he probably wouldn't care anymore. Nova returned home in a daze and fell asleep as soon as she lay down. She didn't know how long she slept before being awakened by the ringing of her phone. When she saw the name Francis flashing on the screen, her mind went blank. "Come to the villa, now." Francis hung up without giving her a chance to speak. Enduring the pain, Nova touched her burning forehead. She seemed to have a fever, but she couldn't worry about that. She immediately headed for the villa. In the past, whenever Francis called, she would come immediately. It had almost become instinct. The villa door opened. Francis's gaze landed on her face. He merely frowned slightly. "Valeria will be moving in soon. I don't want her to notice that there were traces of another woman here. You have one night to clean this place up." Something inside Nova felt as if it were being torn apart, the pain causing her blood to gradually run cold. "Francis, I'm injured," she reminded him softly in a hoarse voice. The next second, she heard Francis's indifferent voice. "Nova, you're not someone who acts delicate." Chapter 5. Nova stood at the doorway with a pale face. Because he didn't love her, there was naturally no tenderness left for her either. Without saying a word, she walked inside and began clearing away her belongings one by one. Francis had never let her stay overnight here, so the things that belonged to her in this house were pitifully few. Yet every single one dragged Nova into memories she could not escape. The pink blanket on the sofa was a gift she had given him last Valentine's Day. His face had been full of disdain, yet he reluctantly brought it home anyway. Once, after they had finished making love on the sofa, he wrapped her bare body in the blanket and teased her. "So this is the real purpose of the blanket you gave me?" The row of cute little ornaments on the cabinet by the entrance had been secretly placed there by her when he wasn't paying attention. When he saw them, he silently allowed them to remain. At the time, she had believed it meant he was letting her enter his life. Enduring the intense pain in her arms, Nova packed these things up one by one and threw them away. The bed, the sofa, the bathroom, the study, every corner of the house was cleaned thoroughly, making sure that not even a single strand of her hair remained. Meanwhile, in the living room, Francis received a call from Valeria and hurriedly left. Before leaving, he only said one sentence. "I've already changed the door password. Check everything carefully before you go. I don't want the cleaning to be incomplete." The moment she heard the door close, Nova's tears surged uncontrollably, dropping onto the floor one after another. It was nearly dawn when Nova finally left the villa. Her body felt cold all over, burning with fever. She walked unsteadily and fainted after only a few steps. When Nova woke again, it was already evening. The sharp smell of disinfectant instantly dragged her back to reality. A nurse was changing her dressing. "You fainted with a high fever on the roadside. Someone brought you to the hospital. If it had been any later, it might have turned into pneumonia. Where are your family members?" Nova froze for a moment, then helplessly curved her lips. "I don't have any family." From the day Francis saved her, she had cut off contact with her parents. For the past 6 years, Francis had been her only family. But now, even Francis didn't want her anymore. Nova stayed in the hospital for 3 full days. On the day she was discharged, she finally turned on her phone. Dozens of missed calls and messages suddenly popped up. All of them were from Francis. Hadn't they already agreed to end things? Why was he looking for her again? Could it be that he was dissatisfied with how she cleaned the villa? Just as she was lost in thought, a call from her best friend came in. "Nova, where have you been? Francis has been looking for you everywhere. He even came to me. Are you okay?" Nova frowned. Francis? Looking for her everywhere? She wanted to ask what was going on, but her friend only left her an address. "Nova, come here first. We'll talk when you get here." Confused, Nova took a taxi directly to the location, but she didn't expect to run into Francis here. The private room door was slightly open. She saw Francis leaning lazily against the sofa, the smoke he exhaled forming rings that half-covered his sharply defined face. Her heart suddenly panicked. Nova quickly withdrew her gaze, lowered her head, and prepared to leave. But the laughter and conversation inside still reached her ears unexpectedly. "Francis, after chasing Valeria for so many years, you finally got her. How does it feel now?" "Honestly, I think that little girl Nova was much better than Valeria. At least she genuinely cared about Francis." "Seriously, you really broke things off with Nova?" I've had my eye on her for a long time. If you don't want her anymore, how about letting your brother here have some fun with her?" Nova unconsciously stopped walking. Finally, Frances's cold voice sounded from inside. "I already broke things off with her. If you want to play with her, then go ahead. Why ask me?" Chapter 6. Nova's face turned pale as she fled the place almost in panic. Her best friend had also heard that Francis was getting married. While cursing him for being a terrible person, she also felt heartbroken for Nova's 6 years. The two of them drank too much, but in the end it was the friend who became completely drunk first. After putting her friend into a car, Nova returned to the private room to retrieve her belongings. When she came out, she happened to see Francis striding quickly in another direction, his face dark and stormy. Subconsciously, she followed his line of sight and saw a man who had no sense of boundaries touching Valeria inappropriately, speaking one vulgar sentence after another, each word stepping directly on Francis's worst triggers. Amid the clinking of glasses, Francis suddenly smashed the wine glass in his hand onto the man's head, then landed a precise punch on his face. His eyes were fierce, completely devoid of the calm self-control he usually maintained. "You dare touch her? Do you have a death wish?" Francis was like a ferocious beast. He pinned the man to the ground, stomping down again and again as if trying to crush the man's bones. "Francis, calm down. I'm fine. Stop." Valeria finally reacted from the shock and hurriedly tried to pull him away. The surrounding people were terrified and scattered to the sides. Nova was pushed forward by the crowd. Francis finally stopped, but the expression on his face became even more frightening. When he made a call, his voice sounded as if it came from hell. "Throw him out and teach him a proper lesson. Whichever hand touched her, he doesn't need that hand anymore." Amid the man's wailing, Francis turned around expressionlessly and pulled Valeria into his arms, gently comforting her trembling body. "It's okay now. Don't be afraid. I came too late," Valeria cried in his arms, still shaken. "I'm fine. I only wanted to come give you a surprise. I didn't expect this to happen." "Francis, I'm sorry. Did I cause you trouble?" Francis held her even tighter, his voice full of concern. "How could you? It's my fault for not protecting you properly. There won't be a next time." Holding Valeria close, Francis turned, and his eyes met Nova's from not far away. A strange emotion flashed through Francis's eyes. When had she arrived? How long had she been watching? But the next moment, his expression turned cold again. "You disappeared for 3 days and nights. Finally decided to show up? I'll take Valeria home first. Wait for my call." Nova said nothing. She quietly lowered her eyes and stepped aside. Looking at her, Francis suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of unease. The Nova from before had also been obedient, but whenever there was another unfamiliar woman beside him, she would pretend to be jealous and ask whether he no longer wanted her. Each time he would laugh and coax her. "My little kitten is so well behaved. How could I bear to abandon you?" But now, her silence made him strangely irritated. Nova stood there as the alcohol rose to her head, tears slowly filling her eyes. She had never seen him so out of control before. Once, in a similar situation, she had also been harassed by a drunk man. Back then Francis had said calmly, "You need to learn to solve problems on your own. I can't always be by your side." So people truly were different. It was simply that she didn't deserve it. She didn't know how long she stood there. Only after the pain in her chest gradually numbed did she slowly turn around to leave. Just as she walked out of the club, someone suddenly grabbed her from behind and pulled her into an embrace. She was so frightened that she almost screamed for help. But the moment she saw who it was, she immediately lost consciousness. Chapter 7. The moment Nova woke up, Francis's friend Tony was leaning over her, pressing her down. Her pupils shrank instantly. She struggled violently, but he easily restrained her. "Francis already said it. If I want to play with you, I can." "Little Nova, be good. I'll make you feel so good you'll forget yourself." His fingers slid to her collar and gently pulled it open. "Do you know how long I've wanted to taste you?" "Get away from me." Nova's voice trembled with tears as she fought desperately. Thinking of the conversation in the private room earlier, despair swallowed her whole. Tony smiled confidently. "I'm not lying to you. Don't believe me? Call Francis. If he can't bear to let me touch you, then I won't." He dialed Francis's number. One call, 2 calls. By the 5th call, the phone was finally answered, but the voice that came through was Valeria's. Francis is making medicine for me right now. What's the matter? The next moment, Francis's voice finally came through. Who is it? Tony covered Nova's mouth. She could only make muffled sounds as tears streamed down her face. He grinned viciously into the phone. Francis. I'm pursuing Nova. No problem, right? There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then Francis's cold voice sounded. She's just a plaything. Stop testing me. The call was hung up mercilessly. Nova trembled in pain, tears flowing uncontrollably. Just as Tony leaned down toward her neck, Nova suddenly snapped back to her senses. She kicked him away with all her strength, grabbed the bedside lamp, and smashed it hard onto his head. Blood instantly gushed from his head as he collapsed sideways onto the bed. Nova seized the opportunity and fled in panic. She ran and ran, stumbling for a long time until she finally stopped in front of the villa. Francis, are you really going to give Miss Lopez to another man? What if that man actually hurts her? Francis held Valeria in his arms, gently feeding her medicine. You're already feeling this awful and you're still worrying about other people? My little princess. Right now I can't be bothered to care about anyone except you. But Miss Lopez will be heartbroken, won't she? Francis curved his lips helplessly. Valeria. She was only a distraction while you weren't around. You're the only one who has ever been in my heart. Do you still not believe me? I believe you. Then be good and drink the medicine. But it's so bitter, Valeria pouted playfully. Francis's brows suddenly relaxed. Then I'll feed it to you another way. After saying that, he poured the medicine into his own mouth, lowered his head, and kissed Valeria, slowly passing the medicine into her mouth before pulling her into his arms and deepening the kiss. Watching this scene, Nova felt as if her heart were being torn apart. She stepped back a few steps and turned to leave. Before she knew it, she had run to the alley where Francis had saved her years ago. Heavy rain suddenly poured down. Water dripped from her hair. She remembered that night had also been a rainy night. A man in a black suit had appeared before her like a god descending from heaven, pulling her out of hell. If you're willing to come with me, no one will ever dare hurt you again. It was those words that made Nova grasp his hand without hesitation and follow him for 6 years. But today, 6 years later, his single sentence, just a plaything, completely tore her heart apart. Nova knelt on the rough concrete ground, her forehead hitting the floor heavily. The 18-year-old Nova had once truly believed, with all her innocence, that she had met a merciful God. Chapter 8. A few days later, Nova received a call from Valeria. Miss Lopez, may I ask if my wedding dress is finished? Nova only wanted to finish this matter as quickly as possible. Her application to study abroad had already been approved once the visa was issued. She could leave immediately, carrying the wedding dress she had stayed up several nights to complete. She arrived at Valeria's house. A group of people surrounded Valeria, asking about her well-being. Some unpleasant words happened to drift into Nova's ears. Valeria, although Francis treats you well, there's that young girl who's been with him for several years. You'd better keep an eye on things. I heard she's young but quite manipulative, probably very skilled in bed. You're overthinking it. Valeria Cruz is the only daughter of the Cruz family. What is that girl in comparison? Does she really think she can compete with Valeria? People with nothing to lose are the most dangerous. Who knows what shameless things that kind of woman might do? The color slowly drained from Nova's face. It wasn't until Valeria noticed her that she parted the crowd with a smile and took Nova's hand. Miss Lopez, thank you for coming all this way. Let's try on the wedding dress first. Everyone's gaze fell onto Nova, and the whispers grew even harsher than before. When Valeria stepped out wearing the wedding dress, Nova suddenly felt dazed. This design had once been something she secretly prepared for herself. She had once foolishly imagined the day she would wear it. Miss Lopez, your design is so beautiful. Oh right, Francis and I are getting married next week. You must come. I really like you. Would you like to be my bridesmaid? Nova awkwardly shook her head. Congratulations to both of you. I won't attend the wedding. I'll probably be busy those days. Valeria suddenly leaned closer with a smile. Miss Lopez, have you always thought Francis truly liked you? But you should know very well that someone from your kind of background could never marry into a wealthy family. I know you were there that night when Tony called. Using that kind of method to get Frances's attention is actually quite clumsy. Frances hates tricks like that. Her face still wore a bright, graceful smile. Anyone watching would think she was sharing some private, friendly conversation with Nova. Nova clenched her fingers tightly, her face turning pale. So that night, Frances had known she was being threatened by Tony and still didn't care whether she lived or died. In that case, Nova said calmly, "Why bother telling me all this? Miss Cruz? Are you lacking confidence? You can rest assured, I will never cling to him." Valeria lowered her voice. "Really? I never believe such nonsense." The next moment, she suddenly picked up a pair of scissors and slashed at the wedding dress she was wearing. Before Nova could react, Valeria staggered backward several steps, staring at her in shock. "Miss Lopez, I only asked you to customize a wedding dress for me, even if you didn't want to do it. There's no need to humiliate me like this in front of everyone." As soon as the words fell, Frances appeared at the doorway. "What's going on?" Valeria rushed into his arms with tearful eyes. "Frances, I don't know what happened to Miss Lopez all of a sudden. I only said the design wasn't stunning enough, and she suddenly got angry and pointed scissors at me." She opened her palm. A cut from the sharp scissors marked her hand, blood covering it. Frances's expression immediately turned cold. Nova hurriedly tried to explain. "I didn't do that. She was the one who..." Before she could finish speaking, a sharp pain suddenly cut off her words. Frances had picked up the scissors, grabbed her hand, and sliced a deep cut across her palm. The piercing pain spread from her hand to her heart, and in that instant, the last trace of feeling she had for him was completely extinguished. Chapter 9. Frances had never been merciful when dealing with Nova. Even now, his eyes were cold as he ordered her to apologize to Valeria. With reddened eyes, Nova stubbornly gritted her teeth and said, "I didn't do anything wrong. Why should I apologize?" His voice was colder than ever. "Nova, you know very well what happens when you defy me. Don't force me to act." Memories suddenly surged through her mind. She still vaguely remembered how he once said that no matter what happened in the future, he would never force her to do something she didn't want to do. She had thought that even if their relationship was only temporary, there must have been at least a little sincerity. It turned out it had all been a lie. The bodyguards behind her stepped forward, forcing her down onto the ground. They pressed her neck and slammed her head toward the floor. Just like that, she was humiliated into apologizing. "Don't ever do something like this again." Frances coldly threw out those words. "There won't be a next time." When Frances heard that, his brows slightly furrowed. A faint uneasiness suddenly flashed through his heart. But Nova staggered to her feet and walked out step by step. Not long after she left the Cruz residence, a man suddenly rushed toward her, shouting angrily, "Frances broke one of my hands, so I'll kill his woman." With several loud bangs, a wine bottle smashed against Nova's head. Warm blood streamed down along her hair as she collapsed into a pool of blood. Her mind grew hazy. Lying on the ground, she struggled to crawl away, but the man stepped heavily on her injured head. "Help! Murder!" Someone passing by suddenly shouted loudly. The man kicked Nova several times before fleeing in panic. Nova suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood. Covered in blood, she tried to call for help. Her fingers subconsciously pressed and held the number 1. It had once been set by Francis himself, so she could easily reach him. The call connected. Francis's impatient voice came through. "Nova, I don't like women who refuse to let things go. It becomes boring." Valeria's voice suddenly sounded from the other side. "Francis, could you help zip up my dress?" The next moment, the line went dead. Nova gave a bitter smile. As she smiled, tears streamed down uncontrollably. Her vision gradually blurred. She closed her eyes and lost consciousness. It felt as though she was having a very long dream. At 18, the first time Francis brought her home, the cold sharpness in his features softened slightly, and she believed that tenderness belonged only to her. At 20, he celebrated her birthday. She would never forget that day. The proud and noble man personally cooked a table full of her favorite dishes. The house was filled with expensive gifts. Secretly, she made a wish in her heart. "I hope I can stay with Francis forever." At 22, he was injured because of her. His family had humiliated her, forcing her to kneel before the Buddha for 3 days and 3 nights to pray for him. When he woke up, He was furious. He pulled her up from the ground and asked her with heartache if she was in pain. When Nova woke again, she found herself lying in a hospital bed. Tears still clung to the corners of her eyes. The moment she turned her head, she saw Francis standing beside the bed, staring at her coldly. "Nova, have you made enough of a scene? Using something like this to force me to come see you, don't you think it's ridiculous? Playing the victim has its limits. This is the first and last time. And also, collaborating with someone like that to stage a show. I don't want to see such a clumsy trick again." After saying that, he turned and left the hospital room, never giving Nova a chance to speak. As soon as Francis left, Valeria arrived. "Francis actually didn't want to come. I was the one who persuaded him to visit you. After all, the person that man wanted to take revenge on was me. You just happened to suffer in my place. But what can we do? Francis seems to think you were putting on an act to gain his attention." Looking at the triumphant expression on Valeria's face, Nova finally understood why Francis had behaved that way earlier. It seemed that it was just another performance orchestrated by Valeria. "Miss Cruz," Nova said quietly, "I'll be leaving soon. You really don't have to treat me like an imaginary enemy." Disgust showed in Valeria's eyes. "If he doesn't completely hate you, how could I feel at ease? Nova, if you know what's good for you, never appear in front of him again. Otherwise next time, you won't be so lucky." Nova watched Valeria leave, a sharp pain spreading through her chest. The wound on her palm throbbed faintly. It was a wound Francis had cut himself. Her phone suddenly chimed with a notification. Her visa had been approved. She stared at the screen for a long time. Tears slowly flowed down again. Finally, everything was about to end. Nova stayed in the hospital for 3 days. On the day she was preparing to leave, she saw a live stream of Francis's wedding while scrolling through WeChat moments. As if possessed, she tapped into it. In the video, Francis stood in a black custom-made suit, smiling brightly as he welcomed his bride. And on that very day, Nova finally accepted her own quiet, humiliating exit. At last, she no longer had to be the substitute who was never allowed to stay the night. Chapter 10. The door of the hospital room suddenly opened at that moment. Hearing the crisp sound of footsteps, Nova slowly raised her head. Her pupils tightened instantly. Before she could cry out, someone forcefully covered her mouth and nose. Her consciousness scattered in an instant. The man who had beaten her until her head was covered in blood spoke beside her ear with a sinister voice. "Miss Lopez, you followed him for 6 years. Are you really willing to be thrown out just like that? Even I think that's unfair to you. So, I'm here to help you." As Nova's mind grew hazy, she completely sank into darkness. At the same time, Francis, who had just finished the wedding ceremony, was about to go look for Valeria when his eyelids suddenly twitched. Subconsciously, he touched the place over his heart and inexplicably thought of Nova. Just then he saw his assistant rushing over in panic. "Something's wrong. Sir, the hospital just called. Miss Lopez has been kidnapped." Francis paused for a moment, because the banquet hall was filled with noisy chatter. The words were almost immediately drowned out. Valeria stopped the assistant. "Francis is already very tired today. What happened to Miss Lopez? You can tell me." The assistant hesitated briefly and repeated what the hospital had just reported. Valeria nodded and dismissed him. "Miss Lopez just staged a dramatic act of suffering a few days ago, and now she's causing trouble again so soon? Go ahead and take care of your work. I'll tell Francis about it." After sending the assistant away, Valeria linked her arm through Francis's and took him to greet the guests with drinks. But Francis seemed distracted the entire day. He had waited a long time for this day. Years ago he had already wanted to marry Valeria. Yet now that the moment had finally arrived, he didn't feel the joy he had imagined. After the wedding banquet ended and they finally sent away the friends who came to the bridal suite, Valeria turned and threw herself into Francis's arms. Standing on tiptoe, she gently kissed his lips. Just as she shyly tried to deepen the kiss, Francis suddenly pushed her away. Valeria froze. "You've been busy all day. Aren't you tired? Go take a shower first." Francis pushed her toward the bathroom. Just as he turned away, Valeria grabbed his wrist. "Francis, do you want to come with me?" He smiled faintly. "You go first. I still have a work call to deal with. Be good." When the bathroom door closed, The smile on Valeria's face gradually stiffened. Who exactly had he been thinking about just now? Ever since the wedding banquet ended, the way he looked at her sometimes felt as if he were looking at someone else. Valeria bit her lip fiercely. No matter what, she was already Francis's wife now. Even if someone else still existed in his heart, she would remove that person completely. Francis walked to the window. Without realizing it, he opened Nova's chat window. Their last message still remained at the moment when he told her to clean the villa, and she had obediently done so. Just like always. Annoyed, he loosened his tie and subconsciously wiped the place on his lips where Valeria had kissed him. In fact, ever since he and Valeria got together, aside from kissing, they had never gone further. He had always said he wanted to save the most beautiful moment for their wedding night, rejecting her attempts at intimacy many times. Yet now that the day had truly arrived, he realized he still didn't feel that desire. He had pursued Valeria for 8 years and waited for her for 8 years. He had believed this love had long been carved into his bones, impossible to abandon. So what had happened just now? When Valeria kissed him, the face that appeared in his mind had actually been Nova's. He remembered the first time Nova kissed him, shy and inexperienced. He had held the back of her head and chuckled softly between breaths. Let me teach you what a kiss really is. Why would he think of her at a moment like this? Francis was lost in thought, not even noticing when Valeria came up behind him and wrapped her arms around him. When her soft body pressed against his back, his first instinct was to push her away. Francis, shall we go register our marriage tomorrow? Back then, both families had insisted on holding the wedding banquet first and registering later because of an auspicious date. Valeria had originally thought it was just a certificate and not urgent, but tonight she suddenly felt uneasy. Francis turned around and casually picked up a blanket to wrap around her body. Sorry, there's an important matter at work that I need to handle. I have to go back to the company immediately. Tomorrow probably won't work either. Another day. A layer of mist instantly filled Valeria's eyes. She wanted to say something, but in the end she forced herself to swallow it. On their wedding night, Francis drove away alone. He drove aimlessly through the streets until he unknowingly arrived downstairs at Nova's apartment. The irritation in his chest could no longer be suppressed. He opened their chat window and sent a message. Are you feeling better? But the message disappeared into silence. He waited the entire night without receiving a reply. Irritated, Francis lit a cigarette. When it burned down to the filter, he finally walked to the apartment door and habitually pressed the fingerprint lock. Inside, the place was even cleaner than he had imagined. Chapter 11. He felt that something in the apartment was missing. Opening the shoe cabinet, he instinctively looked for his slippers, only to find it completely empty. His heart skipped a beat, and a strange sense of unreality washed over him. He quickly scanned the entire apartment. All the familiar items had disappeared. If one looked closely, even the traces he had left in this home seemed to have been completely erased. He had come in too hastily and accidentally knocked over the trash can. Inside it lay a half-burned diary. Francis picked it up and carefully pieced together the torn fragments, his brows gradually furrowing. Today is Francis's birthday. I made a cake for him myself, but he seemed to be in a bad mood. He stayed in the study all night, smoking the entire time. He vaguely remembered that night. It was the night he learned that Valeria had gotten a new boyfriend overseas. He had sat in the dark, silently stewing in frustration the entire night. Today was our first date. He gave me flowers for the first time, white roses. My favorite. He likes long hair and white dresses. He doesn't like people who are too noisy. I will try my best to become the kind of woman he likes. He got drunk last night and held on to me, refusing to let go. It was the first time I had ever seen him like that. He kept murmuring another woman's name. I don't understand why that woman would hurt him so deeply. Looking at these scattered fragments of daily records, Francis seemed to see the girl who had always endured grievances silently in front of him. She had always been obedient before him. In his memories, she rarely even got angry. Clutching the scraps of paper in his hand, he suddenly stood up, rushed downstairs, and drove straight toward the hospital. Suddenly, he missed her. Francis ran several red lights before finally reaching the hospital and heading directly to Nova's ward. But when he pushed open the door, the room was empty. He immediately grabbed a passing nurse. Where is the patient from this room? The nurse was startled by him. When she looked at the room number again, her expression turned cold. She still clearly remembered what had happened earlier that day. The patient had been kidnapped. The hospital had informed Francis's assistant. Yet no response had come. Someone had even said, "Francis got married today. Why would he care about a woman he kept on the side? He probably wishes she'd die sooner. We'd better not get involved." No one sympathized with Nova. Many believed she deserved it. But situations like this were never one-sided. The nurse silently complained in her heart for quite a while before speaking politely. "She seems to have been kidnapped. The surveillance cameras showed someone knocking her unconscious and taking her away. However, someone who claimed to be your wife called and said she would handle the matter. She asked us not to make it public." Francis froze. His wife? Valeria? Nova had been with him for 6 years and had never offended anyone. Who would kidnap her? He suddenly remembered when she had been brought to the hospital with her head smashed open. At that time, Valeria had told him that Nova must have been unwilling to accept being abandoned and was staging a dramatic act of suffering to gain his sympathy. The passerby who brought Nova to the hospital had also claimed that he personally saw her smashing her own head to make it look worse. Could the truth not be like that at all? Thinking of this, Francis's face darkened as he drove straight back to the villa. When Valeria saw him, she thought he had come to take her to register their marriage certificate. She walked toward him with a coquettish smile, about to speak, when he suddenly grabbed her wrist. "Where is Nova? What did you do to her?" His aggressive tone instantly froze the smile on Valeria's face. Her breathing faltered slightly. "Francis, what are you talking about? How would I know where she is?" On the way back, Francis had already questioned his assistant. Yesterday the assistant had tried to report Nova's situation to him, but Valeria had dismissed him. She had wanted Nova to get into trouble. Valeria's wrist hurt from his grip, and her eyes immediately reddened. "Francis, do you care about Nova that much? Don't forget, we're already married. I'm your wife. It's only the second day, and you're questioning me because of another woman?" An inexplicable pressure filled Francis's chest. All he could think about was Nova's injured body. He remembered accusing her of putting on an act and not even saying a single word of concern. The thought stabbed his heart like a knife. "Valeria, I'll give you one last chance. Where is she?" A cold, frightening light flashed in Francis's eyes, an expression Valeria had never seen before. In her memories, Francis had always been gentle. He would care about her endlessly. Even when she rejected him again and again and tried to distance herself, he still stayed by her side without hesitation, telling her he would wait for her, that whenever she turned around, he would still be there. She still remembered the day she finally agreed to be with him. He had been as happy as a child, lifting her up and spinning her around in place. Embarrassed, she told him not to be so high profile, but he laughed and said, "What's wrong with that? I want the whole world to know that you, Valeria, are my girlfriend, and soon, my wife." Chapter 12. That scene felt as if it had happened only yesterday, yet the Francis standing before her today showed a completely different side. "Francis, what exactly do you mean?" Valeria regained her composure, and the smile on her face gradually turned cold. "Don't tell me you still can't let go of Nova?" "That's right, she followed you for 6 years. Of course you must have developed some feelings. But if that's the case, why did you come after me in the first place?" Francis's patience was running out. He had truly believed that he loved Valeria. He had always been certain that the only person he wanted to marry was her. Until yesterday, right before the wedding, he had still believed that firmly. But his distraction during the ceremony, the confusion he felt afterward, and the anger he felt now finally made him realize something. He didn't care about Nova as little as he had thought. "Valeria, Nova is just a pitiful person. Why do you have to target her? She was never your obstacle. If you don't want to see her, I can send her abroad so she'll be far away. But you can't treat her this way. It wasn't me." Valeria cut him off. "I have no idea what happened to her. Besides, she's always been good at playing the victim in front of you. How do you know she isn't doing the same trick again? Yesterday just happened to be our wedding day, and she was kidnapped at exactly that moment. Isn't that a little too coincidental? Couldn't it be that she was trying to ruin our wedding in this way?" At that moment, Valeria's phone suddenly rang. Francis picked it up before she could. Tony's voice came from the other end of the line. "Valeria, that Nova didn't come and ruin your big day, did she?" Do you want me to teach her another lesson for you? Chapter 13. Valeria's face instantly turned pale. She shook her head desperately, trying to explain, but her voice seemed stuck in her throat. Not a single word could come out. A trace of ridicule appeared in Frances's cold eyes. That night, when he told Nova they were over, she had obediently nodded and said yes, just like every time before, never once defying him. Thinking back over the past 6 years, when had she ever disobeyed him? Even when he had done things that were excessive, she never got angry, nor did she ever let him see her unhappiness. He had forced himself to suppress those unexpected emotions, thinking that since he had given her enough money, at least she would live without worries in the future and wouldn't have to endure anyone else's disdain. But what had happened in the end? It seemed that he had misunderstood her again and again, step by step pushing her toward the edge of a cliff. What happened? Frances's voice sounded. Tony on the other end of the line was startled. His first reaction was actually to hang up. 20 minutes later, Tony was dragged to the villa, covered in dust and looking miserable. He glanced toward Valeria. Frances, you can't blame me for this. Back then you were the one who said you and Nova were over. You said if I wanted to play with her, I could. You know I've had my eye on her for a long time. Only now did Frances realize that when Tony had repeatedly called that night to test him, Nova had been right beside Tony, which meant everything he said. Nova had heard. I was only helping Valeria. She kept worrying that you still had feelings for Nova. If anything, this is actually your fault. Who told you to make her feel so insecure? Frances let out a cold laugh. He ordered someone to drag Tony outside. Soon, Valeria heard Tony's miserable screams echoing from outside. Her face instantly turned white, and her whole body trembled uncontrollably. She had never imagined Frances would become this furious because of Nova. Nova again. Today was only the second day of their marriage. Today was supposed to be the day they registered their marriage certificate, the day she officially became his legitimate wife. Yet everything had been ruined by Nova. Do you have anything else to say? Frances looked at Valeria calmly. He had once truly believed that Valeria was innocent of worldly schemes, someone who would never resort to such manipulations. He loved her beauty. He loved the way she seemed indifferent to worldly matters. To him, she had been like a pure white lily in this chaotic world. But it turned out that he had misjudged her all along. His assistant had told him that on the day Nova was sent to the hospital, she had actually been attacked in retaliation. The passerby who brought her there had been bribed by Valeria, which led him to believe Nova had staged the injury herself, combined with what Valeria and Tony had done behind his back. Frances no longer dared to imagine what else she might have hidden from him. Tears gathered at the corners of Valeria's reddened eyes as she spoke with pitiful grievance. So what if I did all of that? Frances, have you forgotten? I'm your wife. No woman could tolerate her man having another woman who's been with him for 6 years. And now you're angry at me because of her? When you coaxed me into marrying you, what about all the promises you made? Valeria was hysterical, but Frances remained calm, almost frighteningly calm. The filter through which he once viewed her had completely shattered. Now he only saw a stranger, someone cruel. Valeria grabbed his hand as tears streamed down her face. Frances, the person you love is me, isn't it? The moment her hand touched him, a strange wave of resistance surged through his body. Almost instinctively, he pushed her away. Valeria's eyes widened in disbelief. She never imagined he would push her. Tears flowed freely down her face. I'll issue a public statement canceling the marriage. As for you, if anything happens to Nova, you won't get away with it either. No, Frances. You can't do this to me. Valeria cried out desperately, but she could only watch helplessly as he left. When the door finally closed in front of her, she collapsed onto the cold floor in despair. Chapter 14. For several consecutive days, the people Frances had sent out returned with nothing. They had already conducted a carpet search. Yet Nova's whereabouts remained completely unknown. The hospital surveillance footage showed that the man who had taken Nova away was the same person whose hand Frances had once ordered broken. Even so, there were still no leads. Frances slumped into a chair, his mind filled entirely with memories of the time he had spent with Nova. He had never actually intended to let Nova leave. He had thought that even if he regretted it someday in the future, as long as she was still there, it would be enough just to see her occasionally. As for Valeria, She had always been the woman he believed he should marry. They came from equal social backgrounds. She was elegant, graceful, intelligent, and courteous, and she had once been the woman he admired deeply. To him, she seemed like the perfect match. Perhaps it was the obsession of something he had never truly obtained that made him believe the person he loved had always been Valeria. Only now did he realize that what he loved was not Valeria at all. It was merely an illusion from the past, something like a reflection in water or a flower in a mirror that he had never truly grasped. During the 6 years Nova stayed by his side, he had gradually forgotten about Valeria. Those 6 years spent together day and night had allowed Nova to seep into his bones and become a part of his life. Yet he had realized it too late. Not only had he personally driven her away, he had also hurt her again and again because of Valeria, and now she had been kidnapped because of him. That man should have been seeking revenge against him. It was he who had ordered the man's hand broken. If it weren't for him, Nova wouldn't have had her head smashed open, and she certainly wouldn't have been abducted with her life hanging in the balance. Thinking of this, Francis slammed his fist onto the table. Blood instantly seeped out between his fingers. He stared blankly at the blood on his palm. That time too, he had personally cut open Nova's hand. Later it had been proven that Valeria had deliberately cut her own wedding dress and framed Nova. Yet he had punished Nova without even asking for the truth. What had he actually done to her? When Francis's mother walked in, she saw him sitting there like that and spoke with clear displeasure. You were the one who pursued Valeria for so long before she finally agreed to marry you. And now what exactly are you doing? You're a grown man. There should be limits to your behavior. The two families held such a grand wedding, and now you want to cancel the marriage just like that? Where are our families supposed to put their dignity? Francis lowered his eyes and remained silent. It's only Nova after all. She already knew you were getting married. So why did she wait until you personally told her before she finally left? She just wanted to ask you for more money. The stranger Francis behaved. The more his mother's dislike for Nova grew. In her eyes, Nova was nothing more than a poor girl who shamelessly followed a man for 6 years, dreaming of marrying into wealth. But Francis immediately reacted to her words. His expression changed abruptly. What did you say? When did she know about my marriage? A cold glint passed through his mother's eyes. I went to see her right after you and Valeria finalized the marriage. She had to know sooner or later. I only made her give up earlier. Francis's eyes instantly turned red. No wonder she had been so calm when he told her. She had already known. Yet she never showed it in front of him. Never once blamed him. Seeing her son's lost expression, Francis's mother said coldly, "You two could never have been together in the first place. This outcome is the best one. Don't create a rift between you and Valeria because of that kind of woman. Go apologize to her immediately." But Francis seemed not to hear her at all. He simply shook his head, murmuring Nova's name over and over again. At that moment, his phone suddenly rang. The instant Francis answered it, his face turned terrifyingly grim. Chapter 15. The car sped wildly all the way until it finally arrived at the accident site. All around was barren land. Only this warehouse area had been burned beyond recognition. Thick smoke still rolled through the air, not yet fully dispersed. It had been 6 days since Nova was kidnapped. Francis had finally received news about her. His legs weakened slightly. Suddenly, he rushed forward like a madman. But the police stopped him. "Sir, please calm down. Rescue operations are still underway. You cannot enter." His assistant hurried over and quickly reported what they had discovered. After Miss Lopez was taken from the hospital, she was brought here. A fire suddenly broke out last night. It burned very fiercely. The nearby villagers called the police, and only then did we learn Miss Lopez was inside. Francis stared at the blackened warehouse. The place was a mess. Everywhere were traces left by the flames. When rescue workers carried out a charred body, his mind exploded with a loud buzz, as if everything had stopped working. Fortunately, it was a man. But before Francis could even breathe in relief, his pupils suddenly shrank. He shoved his assistant aside and rushed forward. That bracelet. It was the 20th birthday gift he had once given Nova. It had been her favorite bracelet. From the day she first wore it, she had never taken it off. He had once joked that if she liked bracelets so much, he could buy her many others. She didn't have to wear the same one every day. But she had shaken her head and said she only liked that one. Later he had given her many other bracelets of different styles. Yet she never wore any of them. Francis tightly held the charred body in his arms, whether from the figure or from the bracelet around the wrist. It was impossible to escape the possibility that it was Nova. The police hurried over and pulled him away. "Sir, we cannot confirm yet that this body is the person you're looking for. Please calm down and wait patiently for the test results." Francis would never forget that day. The wind was bitterly cold, and his heart felt as if it were being cut apart by thousands of knives. During the long wait for the examination results, he remembered the first time he met Nova. She had been 18 that year, cornered by several men with nowhere left to run. At that moment he had only remembered how Valeria had once been bullied in a similar way, and he felt a moment of pity. From then on, a little follower appeared behind him. She would accompany him when he was in a bad mood. She would cheer him up when he felt down. She would comfort him when he faced difficulties, even when he occasionally lost his temper and told her to get lost. She never left. Even his friends once said, "Although I don't really like Nova, I have to admit, she's the only one who can tolerate your terrible temper." He had always taken her presence beside him for granted. Even after he broke things off with her, he had never imagined that one day she would leave him in this way. Scenes flashed through his mind. That day in the restaurant when boiling soup had been poured onto her. Yet he hurried to take Valeria to the hospital instead of her, even though Nova was far more seriously injured. Knowing she was hurt, yet calling her in the middle of the night to clean the villa. When Tony nearly harmed her, he had said those cruel words over the phone. And again, he had believed Valeria, thinking Nova was merely acting, while ignoring the pain she endured. Francis's heart sank to the bottom. How had he hurt her to such an extent? If he had believed her in the hospital that day, if he had sent someone to care for her, she would never have been kidnapped. Late at night, footsteps finally approached. Francis slowly came back to his senses. He looked blankly at the man walking toward him and heard him say calmly, "Sir, please accept my condolences." Francis's eyes turned red instantly. He grabbed the man by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "What do you mean by condolences? Have you confirmed it clearly? How could it possibly be her?" The man still replied calmly, "According to the tests, the body is indeed Nova. If you do not believe it, you may request another examination, but the result will be the same." But Francis had already gone mad. He refused to listen to a single word, until his mother appeared and slapped him hard across the face. "Since she's dead, prepare her funeral properly. At least she followed you for 6 years, and stop letting me see you like this." Francis's face turned deathly pale. He collapsed onto the ground, laughing as tears blurred his vision. He refused to believe it. How could Nova be dead? She had once said she would stay with him for the rest of his life. Chapter 16. Nova had just finished submitting her enrollment documents. On the way back to her apartment, she bought her favorite white roses. Looking out the window at the continuous drizzle, she couldn't help but think about that night a week ago. After being kidnapped from the hospital, Nova had believed in despair that she would die there. The man who kidnapped her was someone who hated Francis deeply. Only later did she learn his name was Hudson. Hudson poured all his hatred onto Nova, claiming he would make Francis taste the same kind of pain. Nova was terrified, but she forced herself to stay calm and try to save herself. "Kidnapping me is useless," she said. "Francis doesn't care about me at all. I followed him for 6 years, and he still abandoned me without hesitation. You think you can threaten him with me? That's impossible. You injured me like this, and he didn't even come to see me once. Do you really think I'm important to him?" Hudson sneered and picked up a metal rod beside him, swinging it hard at her. The blow made her gasp in pain. "Stop talking nonsense," he said coldly. "Whether you matter or not, we'll know after this call." "Today is the day of his wedding," Nova said quickly. "Do you know how long he waited for this day? He will never answer my call. If you've investigated me, then you should know that I mean nothing to him. You shouldn't have come for me." Just as Hudson raised the phone with a twisted expression, ready to call Francis, the tightly shut warehouse door suddenly opened. "Who gave you the courage to do something this stupid? If you want to die, go die somewhere far away. Don't bring trouble to me." That voice. Nova's body trembled violently. She raised her eyes, and her heart skipped a beat. It was Alex, Francis's longtime rival. "Years ago, At Frances's birthday banquet, she had once run into Alex in the garden. He had joked then, "If you ever stop liking Frances, you can consider me." Frances and I don't get along, but our taste in women is about the same. She had only taken it as provocation and lowered her head in fear, wanting to leave as quickly as possible. They had encountered each other several more times afterward, but never under good circumstances. Once, Frances and Alex even got into a fight for reasons she didn't know. By the time she arrived, Frances had already left, leaving Alex behind with blood dripping from his arm. For some reason, although she wanted to leave immediately, she still gathered her courage and helped bandage his wound. He had laughed teasingly. "Not afraid of me anymore?" "I'm still afraid," she admitted, "but I haven't offended you, so you probably wouldn't hurt me, right?" Those were among the few conversations they ever had. She had thought they would never cross paths again, yet now they met like this. The moment Alex appeared, Hudson reacted like a mouse seeing a cat. Only then did Nova realize Hudson was actually one of Alex's men. "Alex, I just couldn't swallow this anger," Hudson began. "Then aren't you afraid Frances will deal with you once he's free?" Alex replied coldly. "You don't want to lose your other hand too, do you? If that happens, I won't be able to save you." Hudson finally felt fear. "Then, what should I do?" Alex curled his lips coldly. "You didn't think about the consequences when you did this, and now you're asking me what to do. Isn't that a little too late?" Nova looked at Alex with tearful eyes. He looked down at her for a moment, then bent down and untied her. "I'll have someone take you back," he said, "but you're not allowed to speak about this, and Frances must never know." "I already have nothing to do with him," Nova said softly, her voice trembling. Strangely, although she had been terrified just moments ago, seeing Alex made the fear fade. For some reason, she felt certain he wouldn't harm her. Alex looked at her thoughtfully. "Could you take me to the airport?" she asked. "I'm about to miss my flight." Alex laughed lightly. "You're still thinking about catching a flight at a time like this?" Nova gave a bitter smile. She only wanted to quietly leave this place behind. She never wanted to have anything to do with it again. "I can agree to your request," Alex said, "but you must promise me something too. Don't pursue this matter any further with Hudson. He's simple-minded and never thinks about consequences. I'll apologize to you on his behalf." Nova didn't dare look at Hudson. Escaping safely was the most important thing right now, so she could only nod and agree. The sound of a doorbell suddenly rang. Nova's thoughts were pulled back to the present. She walked over and opened the door. Alex stood outside. Compared to a week ago, he seemed less cold and sharp. Raindrops clung to his shoulders, as if he had come from far away through the rain. "Won't you invite your savior in for a cup of tea?" he said with a smile. When Alex smiled, the sharpness in his expression disappeared completely. Although Nova felt slightly uneasy, she stepped aside and let him enter. "I'm already dead," she said sarcastically. "So where did the savior come from?" Alex paused for a moment, then didn't bother hiding it. "You already know? Are you satisfied with the arrangement I made?" Chapter 17. After Nova left, Alex arranged a fake death. The ones who died were both Nova and Hudson. It was also the best chance for Hudson to disappear. From Alex's understanding of Frances, if Hudson were still alive, Frances would hunt him down to the ends of the earth. But now that both of them were dead, things became much simpler. Nova had only discovered news of her own death by chance while watching the news. That warehouse had been burned down by Alex that night. She didn't know what methods he had used, but somehow he had managed to make Frances truly believe that the unrecognizable corpse was hers. Although the thought made her uncomfortable at first, when she thought about it again, she realized it was actually a good thing. At least now, her world could finally be peaceful. During the 6 years she followed Frances, she had never once lived for herself, but now she only wanted to live the life she truly wanted. She wanted to become the real Nova. "Still, I didn't expect Frances to actually have some feelings for you," Alex said casually. "After you died, he's been like a walking corpse. I heard he's completely changed. I just can't understand it. When you were with him, why didn't he know how to cherish you?" Nova quietly brewed tea, completely ignoring his words. "Oh right," Alex continued. His engagement with Valeria has been cancelled. The two families fell out over it. Now Francis is surrounded by enemies on all sides. You should feel pretty satisfied hearing that. Shouldn't you? As he finished speaking, a cup of steaming tea was placed in front of him. Nova also picked out 2 rum cookies she had baked herself to go with the tea. As if she were simply hosting an old friend, Alex's gaze rested on her. He remembered that night. She had been kidnapped. Yet when she saw him she became strangely calm. She didn't cry or make a scene. She only asked him to take her to the airport. Don't you have anything you want to say? He asked. You and Francis have always been enemies. You should be happy to see him in trouble, right? Alex didn't deny it. A faint smile lingered in his eyes as he asked in return. What about you? If you want to go back, I can, Alex. Nova interrupted him gently. It's already over between Francis and me. Don't make jokes like that again. Nova had already thought everything through. When Francis repeatedly abandoned her for Valeria, when he personally cut her palm with the scissors, when he refused to believe she had been injured, at those moments, she had already seen through his heart. He never loved her. So even if he now looked miserable, what did it matter? He was only unwilling to accept the loss. It was nothing more than the emptiness that came after losing something. In a few days, or perhaps a month, he would return to being the same person he had always been. Nothing would change. Alex didn't ask any more questions. He glanced at the time and pulled her up to go get something to eat. Nova initially didn't want to go, but remembering that he had saved her life, she thought treating him to a meal would at least be a way to thank him. The car slowly stopped in front of a small, inconspicuous Chinese restaurant. Alex stepped out and held an umbrella for her. As they moved closer, they accidentally bumped into each other. Her cheek brushed lightly against his chin. Nova's face instantly turned red. She lowered her head and quickly walked ahead. The restaurant owner immediately recognized Alex. The usual? He asked. Alex smiled. I brought a friend this time. It depends on her taste. He handed the menu to Nova. She glanced at it and casually ordered a few dishes. Just as she lifted her head to ask what he wanted to eat, a small jewelry box appeared beside her hand. She opened it. Inside was the bracelet she had once never taken off. How did you? She asked in surprise. I knew it was precious to you, Alex said calmly, so I replaced it with a similar one at the time. But Francis never even noticed that the one he saw was fake. Chapter 18. Nova gave a bleak smile. How could he have noticed? Most of the gifts he gave her were simply delivered through his assistant. Although she treasured that bracelet dearly, to him it was nothing more than an ordinary gift he had casually handed out. Nova picked up the bracelet, suddenly stood up, walked to the stove, and tossed it straight into the fire. Alex watched her with interest, as if he wanted to say something. In the end, however, he simply stayed silent and calmly helped serve food onto her plate. After that day, Alex began appearing frequently in her life. Nova gradually realized he wasn't nearly as difficult to approach as she had imagined. In fact, his personality was completely different from the Alex people described. He would wait outside her classroom after her lectures ended. He would take her to the most famous cafes nearby. The century-old restaurants around the campus gradually became places they visited together. Sometimes, when she had no classes, Alex would casually ask whether she wanted to go on a short trip. They would drive out together for small road trips. Her days became fuller than she had ever expected. Nova knew very well why Alex was doing this. He was trying to make sure she had no spare time or energy left to dwell on the past. Although he never said it out loud, his concerns still reached her heart. She often wondered about it. During the few encounters they had in the past, Alex had never seemed particularly warm-hearted. So why did he now seem like a completely different person? Later, Nova came to a conclusion. Perhaps Alex hadn't changed at all. Perhaps this was who he had always been. It was just that, like everyone else who didn't truly know him, she had only known the rumors. Time passed quietly. Before she knew it, a month had gone by. During this time, Alex stayed by her side so often that she almost forgot he was actually the president of a large corporation. Aren't you busy? You've been staying here all the time. Don't you have work to deal with? Resting her chin on her hand, Nova watched Alex moving around in the kitchen for the first time with genuine curiosity. Alex smiled as he handed her a bowl of soup. He even began peeling shrimp for her and removing fish bones. His movements smooth and practiced, as if he had done this countless times before. Nova stared blankly at the peeled shrimp and the carefully deboned fish. Her eyes suddenly felt sore. "Little girl," Alex said casually. "Haven't I made it obvious enough yet?" Nova's heart skipped 2 beats. Their eyes met. The answer was almost ready to surface. Alex gently tapped her forehead. "If you can't figure it out, then keep thinking about it. Why would a man treat a woman so well for no reason?" Those words lingered in Nova's mind. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the things Alex had said and done. She also remembered the moment he appeared in that dark warehouse, bringing her a feeling of salvation. Early the next morning, Nova was awakened by the sound of knocking at the door. Still half asleep, she opened it. Alex stood outside holding a large bouquet of flowers. "Happy birthday." Nova froze. Only then did she realize that her birthday had quietly arrived. In previous years, she had always spent her birthday with Francis. No matter how busy he was, he would always either have dinner with her or at least call to chat. She never imagined that this year's birthday would be like this. In less than a year, everything had completely changed. "Go change your clothes," Alex said. "I'm taking you somewhere fun." Nova had no classes that day. She followed Alex to a castle garden in the countryside. A Christmas Eve gathering was taking place there. The place was crowded with people. Suddenly, Alex took her hand and quietly reminded her, "Don't get lost." Chapter 19. Nova spent the entire day wandering through the garden with Alex. As evening approached, he mysteriously led her into a dressing room on one side of the castle. Inside hung a beautiful light blue gown and a pair of sparkling high heels. "The ball will start after dark," Alex said. "Change into these and come out. I'll wait outside." Nova wanted to refuse, but Alex didn't give her the chance. After hesitating for a long time, she finally put on the dress he had prepared. The last time she wore a gown was when Francis first took her to an important event. She had clung nervously to his arm, while mocking glances from every direction made her feel exposed and ashamed. At that time, she realized that no matter how expensive the dress she wore was, in many people's eyes she still didn't belong. When Alex saw her, admiration filled his eyes. He extended his hand toward her. Nova hesitated briefly before placing her hand into his. The moment he held it, a sense of security she had never felt before wrapped around her. It turned out Alex was a regular at this place. As soon as they appeared, several familiar people gathered around, teasing him while occasionally glancing at Nova. "Alex, since when did you get a girlfriend? Why didn't you tell us? You've hosted this charity gala for 5 years, and this is the first time you've brought a girl. Aren't you going to introduce her to us? Where did you find someone this beautiful?" Everyone spoke at once. Although the teasing centered on Nova, it didn't make her uncomfortable at all, compared to the way people had treated her when she attended events with Francis. The difference was like night and day. Alex remained calm. His tone carried a hint of protectiveness. "I haven't won her over yet," he said. "Don't scare her away." Just that single sentence made Nova's cheeks instantly flush. She glared at him, but Alex only smiled more calmly. When the music began, Alex invited her. "Would you like to dance?" Nova shook her head. "I don't know how. I can teach you." Before she could protest, he took her hand and led her onto the dance floor. At first Nova was nervous and often stepped on the wrong beat. Sometimes she even stepped on Alex's shoes. But Alex showed no annoyance at all. Instead, he patiently adjusted to her rhythm and leaned close to whisper in her ear, "Don't be nervous. No one is paying attention. People come to places like this just to have fun. Relax." With his reassurance, Nova finally relaxed a little. There seemed to be something magical about Alex. As long as he was beside her, she felt calm. She didn't worry about being surrounded by gossip. She didn't wonder whether she deserved to stand there. When the song ended, a thin layer of sweat covered Nova's forehead. Alex raised his hand to wipe it away. She instinctively tried to avoid him, but he suddenly wrapped an arm around her waist. "Don't move." An ambiguous tension filled the space between them. Nova's ears turned bright red, her breathing uneven as if it no longer belonged to her. "It's a bit warm," she said quickly. "I'm going outside to get some air." She practically fled. When the cold wind brushed her face, Nova finally regained her composure, thinking back on the time she had known Alex. Although it hadn't been long, he seemed to pay attention to every small detail about her. Sometimes a single glance from her was enough for him to know what she wanted. She couldn't quite describe the feeling. It felt strangely familiar, just like how she once was with Francis. Suddenly, colorful fireworks burst across the dark night sky. At the moment the fireworks bloomed, Alex appeared beside her and draped his coat over her shoulders. "Do you like it?" he asked. Nova paused before realizing he meant the fireworks. "Did you prepare this?" "You're celebrating your birthday," Alex replied. "Giving ordinary gifts would be too cliché, so I gave you a sky full of fireworks. I hope your future will bloom as freely as these fireworks." A faint smile curved Alex's lips. He looked up at the sky, the light of the fireworks illuminating the sharp lines of his face. Nova's eyes grew slightly moist. She turned to look at the brilliant sky. This was the most special and precious gift she had ever received in her entire life. That dazzling night seemed to illuminate the darkness of the path ahead. Chapter 20. Francis had never imagined that he would see Nova here. More than a month earlier, after confirming the news of Nova's death, he had lived like a walking corpse. He wished that everyone who had ever hurt Nova would pay the price. He even blamed Nova's death on Valeria. If Valeria hadn't stopped the assistant from informing him about Nova's kidnapping that day, he might have been able to rescue her in time. It was Valeria who had delayed the best opportunity to save her. Valeria cried until she nearly fainted, repeatedly asking him if he had never truly loved her. For the first time, Francis answered her honestly. "The person I love is Nova, and you were only the obsession of something I couldn't have." Even Francis himself found it ironic. During the 6 years Nova stayed with him, he never admitted that he loved her. He had told himself countless times that she was nothing more than a plaything, just a temporary substitute for Valeria. Once Valeria agreed to be with him, Nova would no longer have any value. But when that day actually came, he realized the truth. It was not Nova who couldn't live without him. It was him who couldn't live without Nova. Every day after Nova's death felt like an endless nightmare. How he wished it was all just a dream and that Nova was still alive. He had killed her. He was trapped in the grief of Nova's death and couldn't escape. Valeria was tortured by his rage until she was covered in injuries. Yet he still felt it wasn't enough. In the end, Francis's parents could no longer watch their son lose his mind and stepped in to stop him. Otherwise, Valeria might have lost half her life. After arranging Nova's funeral, Francis suddenly seemed like a different person. Every day he worked mechanically, like a man without a soul. Even now, during this business trip to Berlin, his mind remained stuck on the day Nova died. Francis suddenly closed his eyes tightly. When he opened them again, his breathing burned in his chest, his heart aching faintly. Nova. He murmured the name that he only dared to call freely in his dreams. Nova's entire body stiffened. When she saw Francis standing not far away, her face instantly turned pale. She instinctively turned to leave, but Francis hurried forward and grabbed her hand. "Nova, is that really you? I'm not dreaming, am I? You're still alive?" His voice shifted from doubt to certainty. The corners of his eyes turned red. She wasn't dead. But when he met Nova's calm gaze, it felt as if someone had struck him hard across the head. Waking him from a dream, Nova pulled her hand away. She had thought that seeing Francis again would stir up turbulent emotions. Yet she felt calmer than she had imagined. In that moment, she suddenly realized something. She truly no longer loved Francis. "Thank goodness you're alive, Nova." Before he could finish speaking, Nova linked her arm with Alex's and turned to leave. Only then did Francis notice that someone was standing beside her. His sworn rival, Alex. "Nova, don't go." Francis feared that if she left now, he would lose her again. He rushed forward anxiously, trying to stop her. He was terrified of losing Nova again. The fact that she was alive felt like a gift from heaven. But Alex stepped forward firmly, blocking the distance between them. "Sorry," Alex said calmly. "Nova doesn't seem to want to see you. Please show some respect." Francis's breathing faltered. A surge of anger rose inside him. "Alex, who do you think you are? What right do you have to call her Nova?" He was already irritated by Nova's coldness toward him. Hearing Alex's words made his mind burn with rage. Nova's muddled thoughts gradually cleared. She looked at Francis. A faint, mocking smile appeared on her calm face. He's my boyfriend. Do you think he has the right now? Francis, if I remember correctly, you're already married, and yet you're still bothering me like this. Isn't that a little inappropriate? Chapter 21. Nova's two short sentences left Francis frozen in place. His lips trembled. It took him a long time before he finally spoke, disbelief filling his voice. My engagement with her has already been cancelled. I've realized now that the person I love isn't her, it's always been you. Nova. It was Valeria who caused so many misunderstandings between us. She interfered with the news of your kidnapping so I didn't know in time. Otherwise I would never have ignored you. Nova. There were many things both of us were kept in the dark about. I can explain everything. I didn't know Valeria had cut the wedding dress herself and framed you, which is why I hurt you. When you were attacked and sent to the hospital, she bribed the passerby who brought you there to lie to me. I really believed you were staging it and risking your own safety. I was furious. So that's why The cold wind carried Francis's voice to Nova's ears. He always had an explanation. Even though those things had been done by him, he could still shift all the responsibility onto others. Only today did she realize that the man she had loved for 6 years was actually so pathetic. Francis. Nova said quietly. Did you really not know? Even I could see through those clumsy tricks at a glance. You couldn't possibly have missed them. You just never treated me like a person. You wanted to please her. So you indulged her again and again. That's why she kept pushing further. If you hadn't allowed it, would she have dared to act on her own? Nova's words were like a blade stabbing straight into Francis's heart. That's not true. In fact, wouldn't it have been better if I really had died? Nova continued calmly. You would have gotten what you wanted, and I would have gained my freedom. You could just pretend you never saw me today. Why keep clinging to me? Francis struggled to breathe as he tried to respond. He wanted to tell her that he had never truly let go of her, that he once believed that if she refused to leave him, he could take care of her for the rest of his life. But now those words were stuck in his throat. Nova, you can't be this cruel to me. You have no idea how I've survived this past month. Nova let out a soft laugh. Francis, you once saved my life, and I took revenge attacks meant for the woman you loved, twice. That should repay the life you saved. From now on, we owe each other nothing. Francis watched helplessly as she turned to leave. He tried to follow her, but the bodyguards at the entrance blocked his way. Alex glanced back at him with a look that felt almost like provocation. Francis stood there in a daze, feeling as though his world had collapsed again. Even after getting into the car, Nova's body was still trembling. Alex took her hand. You've already done very well. Don't push yourself too hard. Nova closed her eyes deeply. Everything had happened too suddenly. She never expected to see Francis here. Alex, did you really not know he would come? Since Alex was the organizer of the charity gala, there was no way he didn't know who the guests were. Alex didn't deny it. You can't hide forever. Nova wasn't blaming him. In fact, she didn't think it was a bad thing. Alex was right. She couldn't avoid Francis forever, and she couldn't keep pretending she was dead. Now that she had spoken clearly to him tonight, there was nothing left weighing on her heart. But, Alex added, raising an eyebrow, you told him I'm your boyfriend and used me as a shield without warning me first. Were you trying to make your relationship with him even worse? Nova raised an eyebrow calmly. It wasn't just a shield. Didn't you ask me before whether I truly couldn't see what you were trying to do? Alex's smile froze. He suddenly realized what she meant and became visibly nervous. You mean, you're willing to be with me? Ever since the fireworks had bloomed in the night sky, Nova had already figured out her answer. Alex was a good man. If it was him, she was willing to try believing in love again. She was willing to be brave once more. When Nova nodded, Alex suddenly pulled her into his arms. His heart pounded violently, as if everything in that moment had finally fallen perfectly into place. Nova, he said softly. I will never disappoint you. Chapter 22. Francis refused to give up and eventually found Nova's apartment. He waited downstairs for the entire night. At dawn, when he saw Nova coming down together with Alex, his eyes instantly turned red with rage. He rushed forward and punched Alex in the face. Alex did not fight back. Seeing this, Nova hurried to support Alex, suppressing her anger. She looked at the agitated Francis. Wasn't what I said last night clear enough? How long are you going to keep this up? In the past, you hurt me again and again because of Valeria without even asking for the truth. I did nothing wrong. Yet in your eyes I became some scheming woman. Are you disappointed that I didn't die? Would you rather I had died than see me living a better life than before? Francis shook his head with bloodshot eyes. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but Nova didn't even want to look at him anymore. She helped Alex into the car, then she turned back and walked toward Francis once more. Since you still refuse to let go, I'll say it again. I've completely let go of you. You've seen it yourself. I've already started a new life. So please stop bothering me. You and him. Francis still couldn't believe it. How could the girl who once said she would stay with him forever suddenly abandon him? He saved me, Nova said calmly. He gave me a new life. He taught me to love myself. He made me believe that I can live the life I want, without depending on anyone. The anger in Francis's eyes had not yet faded. You don't even know what kind of person he is. He approached you deliberately just to deal with me. If you knew the history between us, you'd understand that he doesn't have good intentions toward you. I don't want to know anything about your conflicts, Nova replied quietly. All I know is that he treats me well. That was all she wanted to say. Only after meeting Francis again did she realize that there was truly nothing left to say between them. Nova, give me another chance. I'll treat you well this time. Nova disgustedly shook off his hand. Francis, stop this. Those were the final words she left for him. Then she got into the car. The car drove away in front of Francis. Francis had never imagined that he would lose Nova a second time in his life. When he first saw her alive the night before, he had been overjoyed. For a moment he believed that heaven had shown him mercy and given him a chance to start over. But reality struck him cruelly. Once something is lost, it never returns. Inside the car, Nova's heartbeat was still racing. She couldn't tell whether it was because of Francis, or because of Alex sitting beside her. Alex remembered that the night before, when Nova had fallen asleep, he had answered a call from Francis. Francis had demanded to know whether everything had been planned. Alex admitted it openly. Of course he was happy to see Nova and Francis never meet again. The fake death had only been arranged so Francis would stop chasing Nova. And now that Nova truly seemed to have moved on, Alex believed there was no reason for her to keep hiding. Facing Francis openly wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Alex, Nova suddenly said. Her gaze rested on him with a hint of scrutiny. Were you acting just now? You could have dodged Francis's punch. Alex smiled, raising his eyebrows slightly. He didn't bother pretending anymore. Yes, I acted. I wanted you to feel a little sorry for me. Nova touched the place on his face where he had been hit, feeling a little uncomfortable. When exactly did you start? She stopped halfway through the question, but Alex already understood. He smiled. A long time ago. Maybe the first time you attended a public event with him, or maybe the first time you bandaged my wound. In other words, Alex had fallen for Nova much earlier. Back then, Nova's eyes only held Francis. Even though Alex had feelings, he had never truly thought about taking her away, until he heard that Francis was getting married, and the bride wasn't Nova. Only then did he think that perhaps his chance had finally come. Nova, Alex said with a grin. If I told you that I was actually quite happy when I heard you two broke up, would you be angry? Nova frowned slightly, both annoyed and amused. She had never imagined that someone who seemed so intimidating had secretly liked her for so long. So what is this? She asked. Love at first sight? Alex didn't deny it. You could say that. Silence filled the car again. Alex visibly grew nervous. You're not angry, right? Nova looked at him. Why would I be angry? Because I've been planning this for a long time? She thought about it for a long time. The words she most wanted to say to Alex were simply thank you. Alex, I should be thanking you. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened the night I was kidnapped. If it weren't for you handling everything afterward, I could never have left that place safely or lived the life I have now. In truth, she had already realized that he stayed because he wanted to take care of her. She simply hadn't dared to think it involved love. So, let me ask you again properly. Nova, will you be my girlfriend? Nova's eyes slowly turned red, blushing shyly. She nodded. Alex's face lit up with joy. He gently held her face and leaned down to kiss her. From that moment on, Nova could finally live freely as herself, and she knew that no matter what happened in the future, Alex would always be by her side, holding her hand as they walked forward together.